ready to go.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ChamberRVA's Virtual Education Forum on Equity and Opportunity in Education. I'm Brian Anderson, President and CEO of ChamberRVA, and we are privileged to have this opportunity to bring this informative session to you all. This is a 5-part series to help us discuss not only education, but through the lens of equity and opportunity. I want to thank our sponsors. Our presenting sponsor for the series is Dominion Energy. Our session sponsor today is Altria, who also serves a gold sponsor, Altria, Capital One, Virginia 529, and our silver sponsor, Facebook. And again, we are grateful if you could be with us today to talk about these important topics. We have a wonderful panelist who I'll introduce in a few minutes, but first I'll introduce from Dominion Energy, Darius Johnson. Darius serves as the Vice President for Employee Engagement and Development for Dominion Energy. And Darius, we welcome you here and thank you and your organization for making this possible.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you all for inviting me today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about some issues that are definitely close to my heart. Today's session, of course, focuses on removing barriers to equity and opportunity in education, and I certainly can't do justice in a few short minutes to a topic about which literally hundreds of books have been written, but I know everyone will agree that much more work remains to be done and that everyone has a part to play. In early June, after the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, and the social unrest that followed, Dominion Energy tried to figure out what our role should be. After careful reflection, we announced what we are calling the HBCU Promise. It's a 6-year, $35 million commitment to support historically Black colleges and universities across our footprint. That commitment, by the way, builds on our earlier commitment of a $5 million gift to support social justice and community rebuilding in the wake of the protests. But $25 million of the $35 million commitment will go to HBCUs, 4 in Virginia, 4 in South Carolina, 1 in North Carolina, and 2 in Ohio. The other $10 million will go to provide scholarships to students in our service territory. This is a huge commitment for us. But obviously, we don't expect it to solve everything, because while supporting HBCUs and providing scholarships is important, we know some barriers to equity are not just financial. So last month, we began a series of employee town halls to discuss issues of race and social justice, similar to this forum. They were honest and very thought-provoking, and our employees said they were educational and ultimately generated hope. One thing we learned is that many of our colleagues, and many of our African-American colleagues specifically, including myself, have been keeping some important truths bottled up for a long time that we don't talk about in meetings or the break room. These are things that my colleagues need to hear, but for various reasons are not getting shared as much as they should be or could be. And this reminded us of something important, that while we've made great strides in diversifying our workforce, we need to make sure that all employees feel comfortable coming to work as their full, true, and authentic selves. Because for real equity and opportunity, we also need inclusion. And including people means including them as they really are, not just a persona they adopt when they come to the office. So I think one important question we should ask today when we think about removing barriers is what kind of barriers, whether institutional, self-imposed, or whatever, keep people from showing up as their truest version of themselves. And we should work to break those down. I believe Ed Bain told you last week, for those who participated, that we're doing some very exciting things at Dominion Energy as we pursue our vision of building a clean and sustainable energy future. We're building the largest offshore wind farm in the Americas. We rank 3rd among energy companies for solar, and we're building more energy storage and cutting emissions to net zero by 2050. And those efforts will indeed make a big difference to the environment, to Virginia's economy. But the most important difference that we can make is a difference in people's lives. This is what the HBCU Promise is all about. And ultimately, that is what Dominion Energy is all about. So thank you for allowing me to be here. I'll turn it back over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Darius. More importantly, what your team do every day to make sure that we can have the power we need to live our lives and do our jobs. I know with the recent storm, many of your customers do not have power, but you are working to get that back even as we speak. And those of us that do have power are grateful that light switch, that the light comes on, we turn the switch. So thank you for all that you all do. Let me introduce the panelists real quick today. And again, we are fortunate to have very talented panelists to talk us through today's subject matter. The first is Dr. Monica Manns. Dr. Manns serves as the Chief Equity, Diversity, and Opportunity Officer for Henrico County Schools. The Office of Equity, Diversity, and Opportunity develops, implements, and assesses the division's short and long-range cultural diversity plans. They also work with other departments to make sure they are reviewing and revising academic programs and curricula. They work to recruit and retain a diverse workforce for the system, and as a contact point for parent and employee concerns about cultural diversity. They work to build connections within community organizations. They work to coach and train students, families, and employees on cultural diversity issues, and they also facilitate the school division's Equity and Diversity Advisory Committee. Dr. Mans has worked in both nonprofit and public sectors in a variety of capacities. She earned her bachelor's degree from Berea College in Kentucky, a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling from the University of Kentucky, a master's degree in education from Virginia Tech, and a doctorate of educational policy planning and leadership to finish out from the College of William and Mary. So Dr. Mans, we welcome you here today and look forward to hearing from you. You're also, your personal life, you are married with 2 children, one of which is in the Henrico County School System, so I know they benefit from having you there with them. We're also going to hear from CTE Director Mac Beaton. Mac serves as the Director of Career and Technical Education in Henrico County School System. As a CTAE Director, they provide students with the foundational knowledge to jumpstart their careers, while at the same time exploring other opportunities of continuing education. Students within the CTE program graduate with more than just a diploma. They have a skill set that prepares them for the world of work as they leave K-12 education. Many offer the opportunity to gain college credit while they're in high school, and MAC oversees those dual enrollment opportunities as well. And we are thankful, MAC, that you could be here today, and thank you for your leadership in directing the college, the system of workforce and career development, formerly known as career and technical education. And we're also going to have facilitating today's conversation and panel, Dr. Nia Hamlet. Dr. Hamlet's the Chief of Staff for Loudoun County Public Schools and is a key strategic advisor to the superintendent and members of the superintendent's cabinet. She provides effective and responsive communications while working through leadership opportunities and relating the innovative approaches to fulfilling the strategic plan of the school division. She also supervises the Director of Equity and views the work of the district through an equity lens. She has served as Assistant Superintendent for Instructional Support in Henrico County Public Schools, where she also supervised a variety of instructional and support programs such as the Exceptional Education, Family and Community Engagement, federal programs, student support, and disciplinary review, among others. She's also been a Title I reading specialist, special education teacher in Virginia Beach Public Schools. She earned her Doctorate of Education from the College of William and Mary and has a dual Postmaster's Professional Teaching license with endorsements in learning disabilities, K-12 reading specialization, and administration and supervision. She is also married with 3 children and lives in Loudoun County. Welcome to you, Dr. Hamlet, and all that you will help us with this panel discussion. So as you all can see that are participating today, we have a wonderful panel full of experience and knowledge to walk us through this key topic of removing barriers. Panelists, welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Let me first say, I really want to take a moment and thank the sponsors. I think without them, we would not be having these conversations. I appreciate everybody taking the time to be with us today. Let me go down. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about why we're even here doing this work or having this conversation. It's important that we understand that when we talk about barriers, it is not about barriers to employment. It is about barriers that for many of our, what? This is moving. I apologize. Which slide are we on?
I think you need to give the ball, the hosting permissions to Dr. Mans, and then you'll be able to show the slides from your screen. So give us 1 second, please.
Yep. And then hover over and see the thumbnails on the left there, Dr. Mans. Just hover over your screen and you'll see the thumbnails. Got it?
Got it. Are you seeing what I'm seeing, research?
Yep. We're all good.
Okay. All right, wonderful. Thank you. All right, so I want to first start off by saying, let's make sure that we understand that when we talk about barriers to employment, that we're not just talking about this as a favor. I think sometimes we think about why students aren't successful, particularly minority students aren't successful in the diverse workforce, is that we are not thinking about them as an advantage. A 2015 McKinsey report found that there is, when racial diversity in management, they're 35% more likely to have financial returns above their industry mean. And those in the top quartile for gender diversity were 15 times more likely to have returns above the industry mean. It is with these intentions that we address the issues of barriers. When you're planning to hire new employees or interns, consider making an effort to hire a diverse range of people across gender, age, and cultural backgrounds. Your organization could soon enjoy a wide range of benefits, to include increased productivity, improved creativity, increased profits, improved employee engagement, reduced employee turnover, improved company reputation, and a wider range of skills, as well as improved cultural insights, because as we know, our society is becoming a majority-minority society, and it's going to be really important that we have a diverse group of people at the table. So the first question that I ask is, for a barrier, is do they even know? Many times, our students are not even aware of the opportunities that present themselves for employment. Many of our students do not engage in some of the same ways in which we look for employment. They're not reading the newspaper, they're not watching the news, they're not looking at the commercials that are on TV. Most of our students are actually involved in mobile communication. So when we're thinking about engaging them and trying to employ our students, we have to think a lot about the mobile phones. How are we getting information to them? How are we understanding that they're seeing that? And so that takes us to the power of social media. So how many of you all, and I'm going to ask you again, I can't see you, but how many of you all are aware of TikTok, right? TikTok is something I thought was fun, but TikTok also is a great way to educate students about opportunities in different employee spaces. When you think about that being one of the primary ways that our young people are getting information, we have to begin to understand that it's important to meet them where they are. We also have to show up in their spaces, in their communities. Many of the employers that we find in Henrico County oftentimes are situated on particular areas, but they're looking for diverse staff, but those staff are not where the buildings are. So if you don't have employees who are showing up in the spaces that these students are in, then they are not aware that these opportunities even exist. So it's important that as you're thinking about this, is that we're thinking about it through the lens of, are we showing up in these spaces that our students are in, particularly the diversity that you would want at your companies at this point. And so I want us to take a moment and look at this picture. So what you see in front of you is a teacher who's in the yellow t-shirt, and he has a number of students around him. So these students, who would you hire? Of this group of students, who is it that you would hire? So I want you to think about it. Is it the knowledge of the work? Is it their education? Is it their certification? Is it their workplace readiness? Is it their age? Is it their gender? Or is it an affiliation with a network? Which of these students deserve the opportunity? So when we think about that, we have to understand that our labor market experience is really us as employers asking ourselves these questions. And we want to believe that we hire the person with the strongest education, certification, and experience. But the reality is that the unemployment rate among African Americans is 5 times higher than any other American. So that would mean that the argument here in this picture is that even if an African American was the person with the most knowledge, education, and certification, that the likelihood would they be hired would be highly unlikely, based just on the numbers that we see presenting. So as much as, again, we want there to be this idea of equality, it does not equate to fairness, especially when there are biases that exist oftentimes in our hiring process. Because that, again, is another barrier that for many of our students. So first, they don't have the communication to even know an opportunity exists. And then the second barrier exists is even if they are knowledgeable about the opportunity, are they even going to be given a shot to take it? Now, we don't like to talk about race because it makes many people uncomfortable. But people who are oftentimes the minority race are the ones in the room that are the ones who are the most uncomfortable because no one's talking about the presenting issue. So one of the discussions that I want to spend some time on is this power of in-groups. Now, the power of in-groups is basically that there is a tremendous amount of research that shows that we have a tendency to identify people who fit into our comfort zones. These biases can have a powerful influence on both our individual and our group behavior. It could be as simple as favoring a person who favors a sports team, as something more large scale, such as favoring people who share your race, ethnicity, religion, or nationality. In-group bias is a tendency to favor one's own group, its members, its characteristics, and its products, particularly in reference to other groups. Research has shown that the desire to favor in-group develops in young children and increases as you age. It oftentimes influences your behavior. There was one of the research studies, they had a group of elementary age students. They gave them each a set of coins, and the students were told that there was a mixture of black and white students in the class. They gave the students a set of coins, and in every instance, the student of the same race gave the coins to the group. The student who had the coins gave it to the individuals who were in their race makeup. So if it was a white student who was the group of individuals who had the coins, they would give those coins out to the other white students in the group. If it was a black student who had the coins, they would give those coins out to the black students in the group. The only time this changed is when students, an adult walked in the room, and once the adult walked in the room, the student of that race who had the coins would then share their coins around with all their other peers. And when asked why they changed their behavior, they said that it was because somebody was watching them. There was a level of accountability. But when asked to do it on their own, they went back into their comfort zone and would give them the coins out to those who were their peers. So when we think about in-group bias and how that looks, that's the same tendency that many times happens for our students. The opportunities don't always show up at their doors, A, because they don't know about them, and when they do show up to take advantage of an opportunity, they may not be given the chance because the individual who's the person in hiring may not see them in their in-group. So I want us to take a look. I came up with an activity that's fairly simple. If you have a sheet of paper, it would be it's easy. So I'm going to ask you 10 questions. I'm going to read them to you, and I'd like you to mark down with one of the markings, and then I want you to think about what this means. So pull out a sheet of paper. It's a fairly quick activity. Again, this is the teacher in me. I was a teacher for many years, so I like to have an activity. I'm going to ask you to write these down. So then I'm going to read each of them to you, and you tell me, you write it on paper. You're not going to have to share this information. It's self-reflective. Write it on the paper, and we're going to think about who's in your in-group. So first thing is, describe the person you are married, dating, or consider your life partner. Is that person indigenous, white, black, Hispanic, Asian, a woman, man, gender fluid? So describe the person you're married, dating, or consider your life partner. Describe your best friend in high school and or college. Your best friend. Describe the person you ate lunch with in high school. Describe the person you ate lunch with in high school. Describe your current best friend. Describe the person you went to prom with or whom you accompanied you to a major high school event. Just one person who you went to prom with, and if you didn't go to prom, many of us did not, I for one did not, whoever accompanied you to another major high school event. Describe the person in your neighborhood that you would consider a friend, your closest friend that's in your neighborhood. Describe the person or people who you went with on your last vacation. Or if you did not go with someone, who you hung out with when you arrived at your vacation. Describe the last person you ate dinner or lunch with that was not a work colleague. Describe the last person you ate dinner, I want to repeat that one, or lunch with that was not a work colleague. Describe your favorite singer or performer. And describe your parent or parental figure. So now I want you to take a chance to add it up. Add up which marking did you end up with. So when you all add this up, what you've done is you've identified who may be in your in-group. Now I want you to take a moment to think about the people, the last 5 people that you have had in your professional sphere of influence. Like you've had some type of influence in your professional sphere. Like you wrote them a recommendation, you've hired for a position, you've agreed to mentor, you have invited them to lunch for some type of feedback, you reached out for support on a project, or you have identified them to be an intern. Which studies show is the group that you've identified as your in-group is also more likely the group that you have placed upon you in your professional sphere of influence. Those individuals are most likely the ones that you're supporting, holding up professionally. Now, this isn't to say that you should not support those who are in your in-group, but we have to be like the teacher who walked into the room with the students. We have to make sure that there is a recognition that that's what we're doing. And if the in-group is the primary group that you are always supporting in your professional sphere, your sphere of influence, then you are being disingenuous to this work of wanting to break down barriers. Because breaking down barriers requires us to actively and assertively reach outside of our in-groups. So I want to take a moment for you all to think about how might in-group bias reduce access for students and impact, and how might it impact them? If you all could take a minute and put that in your chat, that would be great. So how does this kind of in-group bias reduce access for students, and how might it impact them? How might it reduce opportunities for students? And what would be the impact of that? So I want to quickly tell a story. As people are adding things to the chat, I'm going to ask Ms. Hamlet to share, Dr. Hamlet to share some of those. But I want to quickly tell a story about when we think about this. There was a group of students, and they were in a carpentry class. And in this carpentry class, it was a male, and the students consisted of females and males. And all of the students were very good. This particular class, all of them were making A's and B's. And there wasn't anyone that this teacher would have said was not aware, did not have the skill set. But there were two particular students that the teacher always talked to and joked with. One of them lived in his community, and another student shared their love of baseball. So these two students always would joke. Again, teacher was a wonderful teacher. Every student said that was a wonderful teacher. So they get a phone call from an employer to the carpentry teacher. The employer is looking for someone to do an internship. Who do you think ended up getting the internship? So the two students were given the internship. They did wonderful. The other students passed the class, made good grades, went on their way. That is the immediacy of of the reduction of access, because they didn't have access to the internship. They didn't have the opportunity. But let me tell you what the impact is, because I think sometimes we forget about the long-term impact. That same student, many years later, took over the company. And that same student who got the same opportunity from that teacher went back to the teacher every year and went back and asked for the carpentry teacher's students. And that teacher every year kept giving them the same opportunity that he gave the student who actually ended up taking over this person's company. So now we had a situation where this was repetitive, because no one thought to break down a system that was already in place, and the system worked for a very set group of students. Later on, the new owner was having a conversation about diversity, and I'm just going to say that the individual who he kept, the carpenter, always sent him white students, because those are the ones that he was more comfortable and talked to. It was not that he wasn't a good teacher to all students. So when this particular owner, now he owns it, came up through the same carpenter, was looking for diversity, he had already bought into a system that created a workforce that wasn't diverse. Because over the years, the carpenter had always sent the people who he was most comfortable with, who was in his in-group, and most of those individuals ended up being white males. So that's when we talk about impact, students' access and opportunities, and then the larger impact that sometimes we don't spend enough time talking about when we speak about issues of systemic inequities. The systemic inequities is a system has now been put in place that perpetuates a problem, and no one sought to break it. So I'd like to have some of the.
So you'd like to please hear some of the feedback, Dr. Mann?
Yes.
So we have a few people, and folks, feel free to ask questions along the way in the Q&A section. And of course, you can continue to add comments in the chat as well as we participate here. So Dr. Mann, we have a couple of folks who provided some feedback. Thank you to Cinnamon Baker. Students might not include others in conversation, which could impact auditory thinkers negatively. We also had Michael Reynolds, who talked about the significant impact of unconscious bias and that being a huge threat to moving past this issue. And then Monica Davis shared that a part of this issue is also lowering self-esteem of students and needing to be able to create feelings of not being, or seeing that there are some feelings that are created of not feeling worthy of the opportunity. So that is one of the barriers that students are facing. And then Kimberly Brown also shared that it's just the sheer lack of opportunity. I think that is all that we've seen come through so far.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that anyone who submits a chat, you can send it to all panelists instead of just a specific one. That way we all see it. So.
And how you said that, because there's a couple that weren't mentioned that I do wanted to mention. Whitney Zahair said a student might find, I was moving faster than I can go, might find struggle finding a mentor or resources for the future. It's very true. Many of our students have a very difficult time finding a mentor. Like the number of young people that tell me that they want to be a lawyer. They want to be a lawyer. But when you ask them how many lawyers they know, they don't know any. So this idea of them wanting to do something, but they don't have the mentorship. And if it's not in their sphere, if other people who are looking to mentor don't decide, hey, I'm going to reach out to someone who doesn't look like me, then the student may not get a mentor. And when I think about that, it's very disconcerting. I think sometimes I had one of my Asian students who reached out to me and said, you know, I really want to be a lawyer. My parents want me to be a doctor. Both of his parents were doctors. And he asked me, do you know anyone who would mentor me? And so, again, first off, he reached out to me. I am a district level person. He did not feel comfortable enough finding someone within his school to even identify that, because he didn't have that programming set up. And then he reached out to me because he didn't even know anyone in the community that was Asian and that was a lawyer. And so when you think about their students who are really wanting mentorship, but they oftentimes have no way and access to how to get them. And that takes us back to the issue of communication. So again, we want to support students, but they have no idea who it is or how they can get access to you for the support. And then the individuals who may want to be reaching out, are those individuals going to see them? Or are they going to choose someone who they're more comfortable with mentoring? So again, when we talk about this is a larger issue, both from an employment as well as an identification of internships and supports for many of our students.
Yeah, and Dr. Mann, there are actually two comments that came in as you were speaking that are right in line with that. Angela Parsley indicated that students may not reach out to people outside of their in-group. And then Lee Donovan talked about the fact that the comfort level of high school students is key to all of these situations, and that there are barriers that exist, of course, in multiple realms of high school life. And she says that this is especially true for very diverse high schools where there are several minority groups of students who have various comfort levels with their school environment, and that teacher implicit bias also poses concerns for situations of removing barriers for students. So that's right in line with what you're sharing of the story of your student.
All right. And so I want to take some time. We talked a little bit about some of the diversity and inclusivity of barriers, but I wanted to make sure you were aware of some additional barriers that exist for many of our students that to me are really part of a system of inequity. And I'm going to ask that Mac Baton come on. All right, so Mac muted. All right, and Mac, can you tell us a little bit about two areas that we're going to talk about? The first one being prejudging.
Yes, thank you, Monica. You know, and part of what, you know, our goal is for every student to have an equal opportunity and have access to those opportunities. But I want us to look at ourselves for a minute, because when you look at everything that Monica has talked about up to this point, the first question you've got to ask yourself, if you were looking to hire a young person or bring a young person in for an internship, what is it you're looking for? Now, we'd love to say the skills, the attitudes, the work ethic, any experience they may have, but in reality, there's some really some unconscious biases that we've already built up just based on past experiences leading up to this opportunity. For instance, if I were to tell you a student is in a specialty center in Henrico County Schools, you would immediately think, well, that student is going to have a strong skill set, a great work attitude, lots of experiences, future goals, they're driven, they're going to be successful. But just because they're a part of the specialty center doesn't mean that they have those goals. Just like a student who may not be in a specialty center could have a very strong set of skills that you're looking for. So I think the first thing we've got to do is keep focused, as Dr. Edwards, our superintendent, used to say, keep the main thing the main thing. And if you're looking for a skill set, we need to go where those skill sets are and look at all of the students at the same way. Another thing we might think, well, some schools, some programs prepare students better. For instance, Godwin, and I heard Lee was on here, you know, they have the Specialty Center for Health and Medical. Great specialty center, great students coming out of that program. But if you're looking for a student to fill a nurse aide position, is that where you should go to find that student? So you really need to know what the programs are out there in the school system, what programs we're preparing for, and then I'm going to throw one more, and this is the Mac coming out in me. When we talk about students in the ACE centers, and for those of you who may not be aware of the ACE centers, the Advanced Career Education Centers, they used to be referred to as technical centers, and before that they were referred to as the VOTEC centers. And when you think about those students, we're often referring to those students as those students, just because they're in the technical center or the ACE center. So we automatically think, well, these students are not going to be as successful as another student. So you may be overlooking providing those students the opportunity. I want to give you one little story real quick of how an unconscious bias can play into a decision. A young lady was coming from a middle school in the eastern part of our county, was applying for a specialty center, but she missed the deadline. So the counselor reached out to me and said, you know, Max, is there anything we can do to get this young person in the specialty center? And the first question I asked, well, deadline is a deadline, and that's part of the learning experience. But what does this young person want to do with her future? And the counselor said, well, she wants to be a lawyer. Great. And before I could get it out of my mouth, because I was going to suggest the ACE Center, because we have our criminal justice program, and if you're going to go into a law field, wouldn't it be great to have an understanding of the law and how it works before you move forward? Before I could say anything, the counselor said, and I got to tell you, this is a smart young lady. She's smarter than an ACE Center. She shouldn't go to an ACE Center. So automatically, she made a choice for this young person that could have helped her move forward in her career and given a leg up just based on what her perception of the ACE Centers were. And that's in her own house. So I can imagine when you go outside how these perceptions can impact. So if you want to jump to the next slide, Monica.
Absolutely.
When you look at our schools across the board, if you were getting ready to hire someone, where would you go? And then I want you to think internally, why would you choose the school you choose? Is it because of its location? Is it because of the networks that you're comfortable with that are in that school? What's making you choose the location to pull that student from? And just in keeping us on track with our time, because I know we're trying to finish by, I'm a little over. Monica, if you want to jump to the next slide, when you look at those schools, I want you to think about transportation. And how does transportation factor in to equity? There's several good reads that Monica put in this slide that I would encourage you to read. But I want you to think about how, as a high school student, transportation can make or break you, limit you, or provide you access that someone else may not have. So when you think about transportation costs, first off, believe it or not, young people nowadays do not necessarily want to get a driver's license. And we actually went out and started asking students, why don't you want to get a driver's license? First off, a lot of students says, I don't see a need for it. Because of social media, they can be anywhere they want to be, anytime they want to be with their friends. There's also a certain amount of fear and responsibility that comes with having a car. Then you get into the costs of cars. If you have a driver's license, you need to have insurance. And gas is not cheap, as we all know. The other part of it is, and this is a surprising factor, you have to think about the behind-the-wheel hours of learning to drive. If you don't have the support at home that will take you out and sit in the car and ride with you, you're not going to get those hours in. You're a step behind. From a parent's perspective, the minute a child gets a driver's license in your household, your insurance goes up if they're under 25. So if you're already living on a shoestring budget, how do you afford this? You only have one car. How do you afford another car? If you add a second car, you have the maintenance of the car, your registration. And then as a parent, and I remember this vividly with my daughter, the minute they get their driver's license and leave, there's a certain amount of fear that jumps in your heart as a parent. Oh my gosh, what have I done? So all these barriers of transportation can factor into a child having an opportunity. Now let's take that one step further. Okay, well they can ride public transportation. There's two maps here. There's the map of Henrico County, and then I put the overlay of the bus schedule or bus routes for Henrico County. Now, I did not add in the times because it's different from weekend and weekends, nights, it's different. So I didn't put any of that in, just the simple transportation opportunities. So if you're living in the eastern part of Verona, and you have an opportunity to work for a company, even at the airport area, and do not have a car, how do you get there? Transportation becomes that barrier for students to get from point A to point B to be successful. So taking this one step further, if I'm fortunate enough to come from an affluent family who has 3 cars already and only 2 drivers, my child gets a driver's license, that child has a leg up over another student because they can simply get from point A to point B to have that experience.
All right. So we want to end this by saying that we talked about a number of barriers. We've talked about communication. We've talked about the in-group bias. We've talked about concerns about prejudging where students are from and their situations. And then we closed it out with transportation. We tried to give you all some things that were more practical, but also some things for you to be really reflective on. And what we're really asking at the end of this is that you give every student an equal chance, and that you recognize that there may be systems in place that you have to break down and to be conscious of. There may be things that you may have to do, communicate differently, get the information out there, make the extra effort. Because what we want is for every student to be given an equal chance, every student to gain work experience, and every student to have the opportunity to be successful. One of the proudest things that I have been a part of, really not been a part of, but to have seen, is Mac Baton put together a letter of intent signing day. And when Mac told me about it, I was like, it was just the greatest thing ever. Because we always sign students if you're going to be an athlete, right? So there's a level of, hoorah over that. But how many athletes, once they go to college, have complete and utter careers after that? What Mac did was put the same level of importance on students being able to sign for a job opportunity that gives this child a life. And in many cases, when you talk to these students, it's not only giving them a professional career, it is a leg up to their parents who were not oftentimes giving the same opportunities. Because remember, these barriers are systemic and have been going on historically. So they didn't have a Mac Baton who was pushing them. They may not have been given the same opportunities. And so when this child signs this letter of intent, not only is it changing their life, but it could potentially be changing their whole family's life.
All right. Dr. Mans and Mr. Baton, thank you so much for the presentation and for engaging the participants as we've gone along. I know that we're running low on time. I do see one question in here. Participants, feel free to add additional questions. But the one question I do see regarding equity barriers, when we're talking about schools themselves, and this writer referenced schools in Henrico and said that schools across Henrico don't offer or have the same offerings, amenities, opportunities, et cetera. So what about the schools themselves as it relates to removing barriers?
I'll say to you, I just this morning got out of a conversation about our gifted programming. When you think about the barriers, our gifted program in elementary oftentimes is the starting point for many of the specialty that students join in the IB programs and the specialty centers. And when you look at our data, it's egregious. And I'm very honest and upfront, it's egregious. And so one of the conversations that I had today is when we think about educational equity, we have to mean that we have to give more, not that we take anything away from anyone, but sometimes we have to give greater supports to ensure that they are given, that there's a level of equality and effort. So with the gifted programming, we are going to be doing classes, and we're going to be doing specialized classes for all of the second and third grade. But my conversation was on the East End, where we know that we have not identified enough students consistently for giftedness. Why aren't we giving them more classes in that space? So part of that conversation then becomes, okay, this isn't about doing for all. This is about ensuring that groups that have been marginalized historically are given greater opportunities because they are not starting off on the same playing field. And I think that is a conversation that when we talk about equity, we want everything to be the same. Educational equity is not that. It is that we must ensure that students who have not always been given the same opportunities, we do extra for them so that they can show up on the same playing field as everyone else. And so that's just an example to go along with that.
And Monica, if I could jump in on that as well, I want you to think about the programs that, when we say there's not equity across the county, what drives a program? Number one, if parents start to say, I want this, we will respond. The students who we're talking about that are not getting the necessary program sometimes are simply because they don't have that voice or the support that's driving this need. So therefore, I think it's incumbent upon us as educators and the business community to say, in order to build a successful workforce in Henrico County, these are the things we need. Whether it's another ACE center, whether it's another specialty center, we need to be the voice of leading that charge, because the parents and the students that really need this the most have the lowest voice. They're not going to be speaking the loudest.
When Ms. Nelson asked me to do this, this is my first time ever training via virtual, and so I was a little hesitant, but I think it speaks to what Mac said. The reason that Mac and I wanted to make sure we were here is because we really, truly need a partnership with the business communities. And not just as an opportunity, we need you all for internships, we need you all for job opportunities, we need you all to come speak, we need the additional financial support, but we also need your voices. Because while I started off talking about the fact that employers that have more diverse work communities have higher success rates, I want us to make sure that we really understand that you have to have employees that have the skills to sit at the tables to be able to provide you all with that level, to fill those positions. And so we truly need the business community to urge us on, because you all do have a loud voice, and you all are, and you do have an impact, to make sure that all of the students are being given the additional opportunities, because you want to have the most diverse and skilled workforce in order to get the best product and the highest amount of productivity.
Yeah, so Monica and Mac, and I think this is interesting. I was taking notes, and I also see a couple of questions that have come in. I'm going to try to combine them that are, and I think maybe responsive to what you were just speaking of. So accountability. You talked about accountability as it relates to in-group bias. So what would you say to employers who say that they don't hire based on race or ethnicity or gender, and that they're really just seeking to find a balance between, the right fit for the organization and considering the dynamics or the culture of the organization? So what would you say to employers or to school employees as it relates to that topic, and how can they remove barriers that are reinforced by the community? And also, why not just be intentional about finding students outside of the normal or usual groups or individuals that are being hired?
Well, Naya, you answered the question for me. There has to be a level of intentionality. If there isn't a heightened level of intentionality, you're going to get what you've always gotten, right? And so I think that part of it is seeking that the individuals are sitting at the table across from you to even interview. So have you communicated to a broad space to make sure that you have a diverse group of individuals to even interview? Because how do you say that you're looking for the best if you haven't gone out there intentionally and identified a diverse group of people to even interview? So I think that, and I say the same thing internally for us. We look at our specialty centers, to go back to this issue of that we are a work in progress. Many of our specialty centers are disproportionate in nature, and we are having a lot of really uncomfortable conversations around what that means and what it looks like. And the conversation that I oftentimes goes back to is, what is your level of intentionality? What are you willing to do? What is the extra effort? I don't want to take any opportunity from anyone else. I just want to make sure that there are more people who have the opportunity. And then the other thing is, what questions are you asking once they show up at the interview? Are you showing that you are you making sure that the individuals that you're interviewing are committed to this idea of diversity. It is one thing to say that, yeah, I'm used to working with diverse groups. You got to ask them some questions. You have to ask them, what does that look like? Ask them case study questions. Ask them conversations about how have you worked in diverse groups? Because I think that there has to be, when you're a person of color, I can tell you regularly that I have worked in many diverse spaces as the only African American. So I have a completely different response to how I communicate, how I engage with different peers, because I've learned to change the way in which I move in different spaces. So I need you to ask me a question about that. And people who may not have that experience, you may think to themselves, oh, well, they have the certifications, but do they have the ability to move in diverse spaces and engage in diverse spaces? Because they may not, because they have chosen either knowingly or unknowingly to stay within their own in-group bias. So I think that there are ways in which you can do that, both in schools, which we're working on. There's levels to it, right? There's systems that need to be broken down, but there's also systems externally in jobs that need to be broken down. And that starts with being intentional about bringing people to the table and having intentional questions that allow you to see their abilities.
Thank you.
And
Mr. Anderson, I think we have about 1 minute to spare. So I think there are a couple of questions, but I know we're running low on time. Would you like to go ahead and close us out? I think you're on mute.
You're muted.
That will delay. Dr. Hamlet, thank you for helping assist with the Q&A. And really, Dr. Mans and Mac, you guys you did exactly what we needed you to do for us. Now, let me just say, and I'll take a couple extra seconds, Monica, as you kind of challenged the business community, and I appreciate that because that's who our audience typically is. Today we've got a little bit of everybody from the business community, from the education world. But you're right, we've got to be partners in this. I'm reminded of Charles Wesley being a United Methodist saying, the 3 simple rules, 2 of which are do no harm, and the second is to do good. And I think a lot of people have done okay with the do no harm piece, but we haven't been intentional about expanding our circles of friends and circles of acquaintances and our networks. So you're exactly right. We've got to be reminded that there's a challenge on all of us to look for the opportunities that aren't just going to fall in our laps. Don't let that unbiased or that bias that's not intentional also cloud what we can do to make sure we're being the most diverse and equitable people that we're supposed to be. So I appreciate you. That exercise was very helpful for me. I've done a couple of others, and I think that's what all of us need to do as leaders, because we've got to challenge that. We can't just, again, assume that we're not doing harm because we're good people. We have good hearts. That still may not help us have the opportunity, provide the opportunity to those that we're trying to help as well as we can. So the business community hears, what you're saying. More importantly, I think this movement, which is across our nation, is really making business leaders and others challenge their own biases, challenge their own ways of thinking, but more importantly, opening their eyes to making sure that there are no barriers. And that being the topic of today's message is how do we continue to consciously and intensely remove barriers to opportunity that could be inhibiting the talent of our young people and older people equally. How do we help people reach their potential? So Dr. Mans, thank you. Mac, thank you. Naya, for being a part of what we're doing. We want to thank Dominion Energy for being our presenting sponsor for the whole series. Our session leader, session sponsor, Altria, who also is a gold sponsor along with Capital One, Virginia 529, and a silver sponsor, Facebook. Hope you've enjoyed this conversation. No, I did. We have 3 more of these, which are continuing to drive the conversation of equity and opportunity in our educational sphere, and we hope that you all will continue to be a part of that conversation and help us all be better about doing good for all people. Appreciate you, and have a great rest of your day.